July 27, 1944, near Saint-Denis-le-Gast in Normandy. A German 88 mm shell screamed through the air and slammed into the side of an American Sherman tank. The impact ripped open steel plating, shrieking as molten shards tore away. For the Panther crew that fired it, the result should have been inevitable. 5 Americans consumed by fire. The gunner of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, held his breath, waiting for the familiar bloom of flame. He had seen it dozens of times before. A successful hit, the turret erupting, ammunition igniting, and a Sherman turned into a fiery tomb. But this time, nothing. No fireball, no catastrophic explosion. Instead, to their disbelief, the Sherman's turret began to move. Slowly, deliberately, its 76 mm gun pivoting toward the Panther. Inside the German tank, confusion replaced triumph. Their loader, halfway through reaching for another round, froze. Every manual, every battlefield report from Russia to North Africa had taught them the same thing. A hit like that should have meant instant death. And yet, here the Sherman stood, damaged but alive, still fighting back. What they were witnessing that morning wasn't luck. It was a quiet revolution in tank warfare. The Americans had introduced a secret modification, one the Germans hadn't even noticed. This wasn't the same Sherman they had learned to exploit. This was an M4A3 with Wet-Stowage ammunition, a model that hid its greatest defense deep inside the hull. Instead of leaving shells exposed within the crew compartment, the Americans had sealed their ammunition in double-walled bins, each surrounded by nearly 38 gallons of liquid. It was an unassuming change, but it would save thousands of lives. That liquid, a chemical fire suppressant, smothered sparks and molten fragments before they could ignite the propellant charges. Before this, as many as 80% of penetrated Shermans went up in flames. With Wet-Stowage, that number fell to barely 10 or 15%. That morning in Normandy, more than 100 of these modified Shermans from the U.S. 2nd Armored Division rolled into battle. The Germans had no idea. No intelligence report, no field rumor, no whisper in the officers' mess had warned them that their enemy's tanks had changed so drastically. Their calculations, the cold arithmetic of survival, were now dangerously wrong. The story of that hidden advantage began long before Normandy, in another theater, under another sun, the desert of Tunisia. February 1943. The Battle of Kasserine Pass. American tanks lay scattered across the valley floor, their twisted hulls still smoking. The desert shimmered with the wrecks of Shermans torn apart by German 88s and Panzer guns. Out of 300 American tanks engaged, 183 were lost. Most hadn't died from immobilization or broken engines, they'd burned. Inside each wreck, blackened ammunition had detonated, turning the tank into a furnace. British investigators estimated that 65% of destroyed Shermans burned completely. American reports put the number even higher, closer to 80%. It wasn't gasoline that doomed them, it was the ammunition. Each Sherman carried over 70 75mm shells stored around the crew compartment. When enemy rounds punched through the armor, they struck the propellant bags, igniting them instantly. Within seconds, the interior became an inferno. Few men ever made it out. Those who did described the horror, sudden blinding heat, The roar of burning powder, the desperate scramble for escape hatches that often jammed in the chaos. The U.S. Ordnance Department knew something had to change. Engineers scoured the wrecks, dissected the charred hulks, and searched for answers. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. In late 1943, during a tank board meeting, a chemical engineer from DuPont proposed an idea so unconventional it drew laughter. "What if," he said, "we surrounded the ammunition with liquid?" At first, it sounded absurd. Fill a tank with water? It was impractical, even dangerous. Early sketches imagined whole compartments flooded like miniature submarines. But as the idea evolved, the engineers refined it into something elegant. Seal the shells in double-walled bins and fill those walls with a flame-suppressing liquid. By January 1944, the first M4A1 and M4A3 Shermans with the new Wet-Stowage system rolled off American assembly lines. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, they were put to the test. German 75 and 88 millimeter guns fired directly at both dry and wet ammunition racks. The results were undeniable. Dry racks exploded in 3 out of 4 tests. Wet racks caught fire in barely 15% of cases. And even then, the flames were weak, quickly extinguished. The liquid mixture, known as amudamp, was more than water. It resisted freezing at -40 degrees Fahrenheit, prevented corrosion, and even stopped bacterial growth. Clever chemistry for brutal war. The new system added about 900 pounds to each tank, but the trade-off was worth every ounce. Crews now had something they'd never truly had before, a real chance to live through a hit. By April 1944, over 100 of these new Shermans had arrived in England. Assigned to the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions, they missed the D-Day landings but entered the fight during Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy in late July. That's when the Germans began to notice. Their Panthers and anti-tank guns were still punching holes, still achieving penetrations, but the Shermans weren't dying like before. Tanks that should have been caskets were instead retreating, repaired, and returning to battle within days. Frontline German crews sent reports up the chain, insisting that something had changed, but High Command dismissed the accounts as exaggerations or stress-induced confusion. The truth was, their entire doctrine, their training, their maps, their kill charts had suddenly become obsolete. Every German tanker had been taught the same thing: where to shoot a Sherman, where its ammo racks lay, how to trigger its fiery death. But those weak points no longer existed. And so, in Normandy that summer, Panther shells hit true, but failed to kill. The revolution had arrived silently, wrapped in steel and liquid, hidden in plain sight. For the American crews, the difference was more than mechanical. It was psychological. Before Wet-Stowage, many Sherman crews had a grim nickname for their tanks, Ronsons, like the cigarette lighter's slogan, "Lights every time." The fear of burning alive haunted every man who climbed into one. Now, for the first time, they trusted their machines. Veterans began to notice that when a Sherman was hit, there was often time to escape, even time to fight back. The tank might be crippled, but it didn't automatically become a coffin. In field hospitals and tank recovery units, the statistics started to tell the story. Crews who survived direct penetrations doubled. Tank repair rates soared. Instead of writing letters to families explaining another tragic fire, commanders began reporting tanks salvaged, repaired, and back in combat within 48 hours. Still, the public didn't know. Newspapers back home continued to report high losses, while soldiers whispered about wet tanks that somehow stayed alive. The innovation remained quiet, hidden behind code names and serial numbers, until after the war. Yet its impact rippled through every battle from Normandy to the Siegfried Line. When the 3rd Armored Division fought through the hedgerows near St. Lo, Wet-Stowage Shermans proved their worth again and again. German gunners, confident as ever, aimed for the lower hull, right where the ammo racks used to be. The round struck true, armor cracked, but the tanks didn't ignite. Reports from the field were almost incredulous. Took 2 hits, no fire, crew safe, vehicle mobile. Shell penetration, ammunition not ignited, tank recovered. The change wasn't just technical, it altered the entire rhythm of battle. Shermans could stay in the fight longer, giving infantry the cover they desperately needed. A tank that burned meant a lost crew and shattered morale. A tank that survived meant hope. The Germans, meanwhile, had no such safeguard. Their own tanks, Panthers, Tigers, even the mighty King Tiger, carried ammunition openly within their hulls. When those were hit, they too could burn spectacularly. But by mid-1944, they were outnumbered and running low on everything: fuel, spare parts, and time. As the Allies pushed east, tank warfare itself was changing. It wasn't just about thickness of armor or size of gun anymore. It was about survivability. And that small, almost invisible innovation, the liquid-filled ammunition bins, had tipped the balance in the Americans' favor far more than anyone realized. By the end of the war, U.S. Army surveys confirmed the results. In dry stowage Shermans, 60 to 80% of penetrations led to fires. In wet stowage models, that number fell to 10 to 15%. The odds of a crew surviving a tank penetration had effectively doubled. In countless after-action reports, one phrase appeared again and again: crew escaped without injury. For those who lived through it, those 4 words meant everything. When the war finally ended in 1945, the engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground and DuPont, who had dreamed up the liquid system, were never celebrated in parades. There were no medals, no headlines. Their invention remained quietly listed among ammunition stowage improvements, buried in the technical logs of the U.S. Ordnance Department. Yet their work had done something extraordinary. It had turned a death trap into one of the most survivable tanks of the war. The M4 Sherman would never be as heavily armored as a Tiger, nor as fearsome as a Panther. But it could be built faster, repaired quicker, and now, thanks to that hidden system, its crews could live to fight another day. That morning near Saint-Denis-le-Gast, when that single German shell struck the Sherman and failed to ignite it, the men inside didn't know the chemistry, or the engineering, or the months of tests behind their survival. They only knew that the tank was still moving. Smoke filled the turret, alarms blared. The gunner coughed through soot as he swung the 76mm cannon toward the source of the attack. He fired once. The shell struck the Panther squarely in the side armor. The German tank erupted, flames spewing from its turret ring, ammunition cooking off inside. The Sherman's crew didn't cheer. They didn't have the breath for it. They simply watched the enemy burn and realized that, for the first time in a long time, it wasn't them. Later that night, when the battlefield went quiet and the survivors gathered for repair and rest, a mechanic lifted the Sherman side panels and pointed to the sealed metal bins hidden within. Inside those bins, the liquid still sloshed quietly, cold and steady. A secret invention, born from desperation, had rewritten the odds of war. And though no one outside that battlefield would ever see it, the future of armored warfare had already changed forever.